Hello and welcome to another episode of Ewell Acres. Today we're going to continue on with our beekeeping discussions. Today we're going to be talking about how to build frames from a kit. Let's get started. Now, when you're talking about bee frames and beekeeping, there are a few things that are nice to have, some things that are absolutely essential. When you're looking at Langstroth hives, the number one most important thing to have is a steady camera that won't fall over, because then it makes things really hard to film. But once we got the camera upright and filming properly, the next best thing that you need to have is what's called a bee frame. Now what this is a bee frame that is in a Langstroth hive. The particular one that we're building are medium frames today. Whether you're getting shallow, medium, deep, they're all pretty much going to be the same thing. They're just different sizes. Now when you're looking at frames, the materials that it has in it is going to be side mounts, top bars, and the individual plastic frames itself. Now this particular kit that we got, at this point in time, we just decided to order from Manlink Bee Supply. The other item that you're going to need are going to be some sort of a foundation. Now, for this particular one, I chose to go ahead and go with plastic foundation that are medium frames, just because they snap in really easy, and then I'm going to go ahead and wipe some wax on it, so that way the bees can easily draw it out. So those are the three components we have, is the outer wood frames itself, the inner frames, and if you like, one thing that I like to add that's not included as part of the kit is going to be nails, glue, and the tools that you need to construct it. When you get ready to construct the materials, this is what the frame typically looks like. You're going to have the top bar that overhangs a little bit, the two side bars, and the bottom bar that fits in with the groove. One thing that I personally like to do is I like to lay out a whole bunch of these frames all at once, so that way I can build multiples all at the same time. You can do individual frames, but I find by building them out all in a row, it makes it a whole lot simpler to be able to construct it. So I will go ahead and put the bottom frame in, then I will put the side mount and make certain that it sits in nice and firm. And you'll want to make certain that you have the right side facing the right direction, because there's going to be a thicker side of the frame and there's going to be a thinner side of the frame. The thicker side you want towards the top, that's going to be with the top bar. The thinner you want with the bottom. Now, to help make things sturdy with these frames, I'm just going to go ahead and do a little dot of wood glue on each of the grooves on the inside. Is this process necessary? No, but I like to add it just to give these frames a little bit more stability when I'm actually constructing. Now keep in mind, if you do decide to do this, there is going to be some dry time that you will need to deal with. But I prefer doing it. Is this step necessary? No. Now that we've got one side of the frames done, we're going to go ahead and do a dab of glue and do the other side. Like I mentioned before, I like doing a whole bunch of frames all at once and kind of building a little bit of an assembly line. It makes the process go a whole lot faster, especially if you're going to be building 50, 100 frames at a time like I do. Now that we've finished gluing on all of the sides, we are now going to install the top part of the frame. Just like the bottom one, I'm going to go ahead and do a dab of glue on each side on the inner frames, and then I'm going to go ahead and install this top bar across all of them. As you can tell through the entire process, we've got all of these frames nice and done, and we have a small little grouping. In this particular batch, we're working with about 15 frames. I find that a good amount to work with if you don't have that particular system. Now, there are ways that you can go ahead and make this whole process a lot easier. If you're going to be dealing with a lot of frames, I would recommend you build yourself some sort of a jig. I've seen these processes where they are really slick on really, really large operations, where they are dealing with hundreds upon hundreds of frames, where they are able to put all of these items together inside of this jig, use a pneumatic air gun or a stapler, and just go along, staple all of these joints, and it makes it really slick. I have a few smaller hives though, so I'm not necessarily doing thousands upon thousands of frames. I'm only dealing in the hundreds of frames. And so before I build myself a really massive jig, I'm going to build a jig that's kind of a DIY version to help these get set up. Now, what is that DIY jig version? Well, let's go ahead and talk about it. First, I'm going to get 2 standard 2x4s, and I'm going to place them on either side of my frames. Then I'm going to go ahead and take some large C-clamps that I have and very gently on either side compress the 2x4s together. Now this is a poor man's jig that I went ahead and developed to help hold all these frames together while the glue is drying. It's not the most sophisticated. You have to make certain, because sometimes the frames can get a little bit out of square, so that's why I like having 2 of them on either side, so it's the best way possible that I can do to help keep the frame square. Once they're in, and once I make certain that the frames are nice and square, then I'll go ahead and place staples in each of those joints to firm up and help to finalize it. As you can tell, it's nice and firm. I'm actually able to pick up the C-clamps on either side. Now that I've got all my frames in the jigs and I've got everything squared up, I'm just giving these little frames nice little taps to make certain they're firm. I'm going to go ahead and by hand nail in small, fine, 3/4 inch nails that are able, just box nails that are able to go in to get these joints nice and firm. Now, if you're going to be doing a large amount of frames, it might be worthwhile to get a pneumatic stapler. Like I mentioned before, you can just go in and do every single one of them. If you're dealing with frames on the small scale, though, you can use box nails to help keep these joints nice and firm. So I'm going to go ahead and nail in these joints on either side with the box nails. And I'm just going to go ahead and work my way across each one of these frames. Now the nice thing is, because it's in the jig, these frames aren't going to shift around and they're going to be able to stay nice and square because I've got them firmed up with the C-clamps. Now that we've got one side done, we're going to go ahead and just work our way on the other side. And the nice thing is this glue is still wet, and so if we need to, we can do a little bit of shifting around where we need to. And as you can tell, as we're tightening these frame joints up, there's going to be a little bit of glue oozing out in the corners. Don't worry about cleaning it up right now. Go ahead and let the glue dry, and that way you can just take a small little putty knife or your Beehive tool, that's a great multi-tool, and scrape off the excess glue, because it's a whole lot easier cleaning up the glue once it's all dried rather than while it's wet. We've got all of the bottom frames completely nailed in. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take our 2 2x4s with the C-clamps or our jig, we're going to flip all of the frames over, and now we're going to go ahead and nail in the frames from the top. We want to make certain that we've got these nails in as straight as possible, like that one. If you start to get a little bit crooked, take your time, back it out, straighten it up. There's no point in taking the time to nail it, glue it, to make everything look good if you're just going to nail the screws in, or the nails in crooked. So let's continue to hammer. As we've got this area completely done, now we can go ahead and move on to the other side. These are what the joints look like after the glue has dried and everything is nailed in. We've got everything nice and solid. As I mentioned before, we had the glue drying a little bit. Now that the glue is going to be dry, we can go ahead and take the jig off and start to scrape the glue off these individual frames. Just out of demonstration, you can use some sort of a tool. I personally like using a putty knife or a Hive tool to scrape that glue off. If you look, sometimes there are small little grooves on the bottom that can be a little bit hard to get off. So that's why having a nice little putty knife or a Hive tool will be great, because you can get inside the little inner grooves that may be there. when you are scraping it, you want to make certain to get all the little corners off and have it as nice as possible. Is this a big concern if you don't get all of it? No, but it just makes things a little bit cleaner, and that extra 30 seconds that you spend per frame will make them work a whole lot easier and be able to fit with those individual frames once you actually stick them in. We have now completed gluing and putting the actual frames together. Now we're going to take our plastic foundation that we've chosen to insert and stick inside the frame. I personally like plastic foundation because it's one of the easiest to put in. All you've got to do is take it, slide it in the grooves, and pop it in. So that one didn't get on camera, we're going to go ahead and show you how to do it once again. You simply take the frame, you're going to bend it just a little bit. Sometimes it can be a little bit stiff, but that just means you did a good job gluing and holding the frame together so it can hold on pretty well. You're going to bend the frame a little bit, put it into each of the individual grooves, and you have a frame inside. Sometimes it can be a little bit hard to do that, so that's why I like putting one side in and then gradually pushing the frame in along that groove, and it will hold it in nice and tight. Now, there is another version of this foundation that you can put in, and it's wax foundation. Some of it's wired, some of it's not. If you're going to do that method, you have to make eyelets, you have to string fishing line or whatever method you personally choose, and then you take a crimper and crimp that foundation up against that, and then you put in the bar that holds it in. That's how my mentor did it, which is a great way that I learned, but it is significantly a lot more time to install it. So it can be a little bit of a pain. Now that we've got our foundation in and the frames built, let's go ahead and put our frames in the box and see what it looks like. We've got a nice, good fit. We've got medium frames in a medium box. We can go ahead and put 10 frames in, and we're ready to have a super work for a beehive. So this has been how to build frames using a kit. So what's your personal thoughts? Do you prefer using pre-built frames and getting those that are going to be a little bit more expensive, but you don't have to go through the work and doing it? Or do you like building it from these kits so that way it's going to be a little bit more cost effective and actually doing multiple frames in a super itself? Let us know in the comments below what your thoughts are. Thanks so much for joining us today. If you like what we're doing, don't forget to subscribe, click on that little bell for notifications, and we look forward to seeing you next time.